Today is August the 18th. How do you solve a theological problem? Let's find out together as we study Acts chapter 15. Now in Acts chapter 15, Paul and Barnabas have finished their first missionary journey. They return to Antioch and they enjoy their time in Antioch. But while they are there, some from Judea arrive and begin to teach the Gentile believers at Antioch that you must obey the Old Testament word for word. You've got to become a Jew if you really want to be a Christian. Paul and Barnabas say, no, that's not true. The Lord has saved the Gentiles just like he saved the Jews. We follow the Old Testament, but we recognize that the laws of the Old Testament, the cultic laws, are given to the Jewish nation. The Gentiles don't have to obey those. They do have to follow the principles laid out there. It arose to be such an argument that they realized they had a theological issue on their hands. So what do? First of all, what's at stake? Chapter 15, verse 1, what the men from Judea said was that unless you're circumcised as required by the law of Moses, you cannot be saved. Is Christianity a sect of Judaism, or is it something new? That's what's at stake. The Judaizers, the men from Judea, took the position that Christianity was a sect of Judaism, much like being a Nazirite or being an Essene, much like being a Pharisee. You could also be a Christian, a Christ follower, but you had to be Jewish. Paul and Barnabas said, no, this is something totally new. God is saving the Gentiles equally as the Jews, and he calls both to live together as one body. Well, how do you decide? First of all, they decided that they couldn't resolve this issue alone. So in verse 2, they sent Paul and Barnabas to Jerusalem to talk to the apostles and elders about this question. So they went to the authorities in the church and said, here's the question. Here is our position. We'll let them share their position. The question is now before the leaders in Jerusalem. So what did the leaders do? First of all, they let everybody share. Everybody had a chance to express their opinion. Verses 4 and 5 are the presentation by Barnabas and Paul and the people that came with them from Antioch. Then in verse 5, some of the believers who belonged to the sect of the Pharisees stood up and insisted Gentile converts must be circumcised and required to follow the law of Moses. You must be Jewish to be a Christian. God saves the Gentiles, but only if they proselytize to Judaism. So they let everybody share. Then, second stage, they looked at history. After this, verse 6, the apostles and the elders met together to resolve the issue. At the meeting, after a long discussion, Peter stood. And Peter told them, he reminded them of what happened when he went to Joppa, to Cornelius's house. They looked at history. Then, in verse 11, Peter said, we believe that we are all saved the same way, by the undeserved grace of the Lord Jesus. Jew or Gentile receives the grace of the Lord Jesus. They focused on theology. So let's review. Everybody has a chance to express their opinion. You look over your history, you focus on theology, and then the leaders decided. You leave it in the hands of the leadership. When they had finished, verse 13, James stood and said, "Brothers, listen to me." And James says, here's what we're going to do. When they finish, they write a letter. That letter basically is summarized in 19 to 21. My judgment is that we should not make it difficult for the Gentiles who are turning to God. Instead, we should write and tell them, abstain from eating food offered to idols and from sexual immorality. Those two things were things that would commonly be done at pagan temples. So James is saying, divorce yourself totally from pagan religion. Don't eat meat sacrificed to idols. Abstain from sexual immorality. And then don't eat meat of strangled animals and don't drink blood. Two cultic culinary laws of the Jews. They said don't do that either. Now, this was especially true because of verse 21. These laws of Moses have been preached in Jewish synagogues in every city on every Sabbath for many generations. It appears that those last two laws, I believe, were given primarily to the Gentiles who had been attending Jewish synagogues. James is saying, let's not confuse them. Let's continue to uphold that. As Paul goes specifically to Gentile areas where there are no Jews, Paul leaves these last two points by the wayside. He later says in his epistles that eating meat sacrificed to idols is a matter of conscience. If there's someone around that it would offend, don't do it. But if not, it really doesn't matter. How do you resolve a theological issue? First of all, you understand what the issue is. You identify it clearly. Everybody gets a chance to talk. Look at your history. Look at theology. And leave it then to the leaders to decide. By the end of the chapter, Paul and Barnabas separate. John Mark had been with them on the first missionary journey until they left the area that John Mark was familiar with, Cyprus. When they got to Asia Minor, John Mark left. Barnabas wanted to take John Mark with them on the second journey. Paul said, no, I'm not comfortable with that. So Paul forms his own team. That team apparently consists of Paul, of Luke, because at this stage, Luke, the author of the book of Acts, when he talks about where Paul goes, he says, we went. So Luke's in there. Silas, whom the Jerusalem church had sent to talk to the brothers in Antioch. And it appears also that Titus is a part. Galatians chapter 2, verses 1 and 3 talk about Titus being present for Acts chapter 15. So this 4-member team goes with Paul, and in chapter 16, he starts his second missionary journey, the first one that he was actually in charge of. Like, follow, and subscribe to this devotional on whatever platform you use to listen to it. Email your questions to us at questions@becomehope.com. Tomorrow, we'll take a look at Paul's missionary strategy.